So tonight we're here to talk about International Dark Sky Week, and listening to Emily go through my list of topics that I covered. I have to admit I'm embarrassed that light pollution is not one of them. I didn't really know a lot about this until Sierra invited me to moderate the panel, and I started looking at it and realized that the impacts, in Florida here, we think about damage that lights do to turtle nesting, but I mean, I hadn't really grasped the far-reaching impacts to migrating birds, insects, bats, culturally, what we lose when we don't have a fully dark sky at night. When I started to think about it, and I thought about all the magical things, that happen at night and why we love the night so much, and the pollution that's wiping out those kind of magical moments, looking at stars and constellations. So anyway, enough for me. I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. First, we have Travis Longcore. He's earned his PhD in geography at UCLA, where he's now an adjunct professor at the university's Institute of Environment and Sustainability. He's a co-editor of the book Ecological Consequences of Artificial Night Lighting, and he helped pioneer the study of modern light pollution. We're also joined by Brian Raposa, who's the author of Birding Florida, was a longtime science teacher at Mast Academy on Virginia Key. I believe he was Teacher of the Year as well. He's also a board member at Tropical Audubon and organizes their field outings. I know I've encountered Brian when I've done stories about the Christmas bird count. So if you've ever participated them or used their data over the last 20 years, you can thank Brian. And finally, we have Hannah McDougall. She's the Director of Communications with Pelican Harbor Seabird Station. The station was founded in 1980 and so far has treated nearly 40,000 injured animals. So let's start with Travis. And again, looking at this problem in preparation of the panel, I did not realize that 80% of the world now lives in places where they never see a natural night sky. So step back and sort of explain the issue for us, how we got here, and some of the ways that this artificial night light has changed our planet.
Sure, thank you. And I'm coming to you from the ancestral home of the Chumash, the Tatavim, and the Keech in the Los Angeles basin, and recognize them coming to you through the wonders and magic here of a transcontinental and global Zoom of our last couple of years. How did we get where we are, and what is light pollution? Light pollution, depending on how you want to define it, some people might define it as all the light that we introduce as humans, because it sort of disrupts a natural process, a natural pattern of light and dark. We tend to talk about it being the unnecessary and unwanted light, the unuseful light that we as humans produce, and that then interrupts various things. The thing that is perhaps the most obvious to people is thinking about not being able to see the stars, and we can think of that as being astronomical light pollution, being sort of that view of the sky, and that comes through the scattering of light in the atmosphere. That makes the background brighter. We see by means of contrast, and so our eyes are unable to distinguish the fainter stars in terms of the contrast against all that scattered light that is in the atmosphere. And that's stuff that's we refer to that generally as sky glow. And it comes from all of the light that we use as humans, and it's exacerbated by various things. The wavelengths of the light, the color of the light, blue scatters more than, say, yellow. It also is affected by what's in the air. So haze and fog and smoke sort of scatter light more in the air. And then we've also distinguished the idea that there's ecological light pollution, and that's where the light is disrupting some natural pattern that is endemic to and important to ecosystems and their species. And the big distinction there might be that a light that is focused downward and well shielded might not be that much of a threat to astronomical light pollution in terms of seeing the stars. However, if that light is focused downward into, say, a wetland, it is a real impact to the species that might live there. And so that's our distinction, and one of the ways that we can think about the difference between those two. And we got there Well, through basically fossil fuels and the Industrial Revolution, that leading to gas lamps back at the end of in the 1800s, leading then eventually to electrical lighting, and then growth over the century of the 1900s at a pace that actually far exceeded population. And so we continue to see that pattern today. And so that gets us to a point where we have natural processes that are threatened by light pollution, species in particular that are threatened by light pollution, and groups of species. And then also, as has been noticed by the astronomers in the literature going back literally the mid 1900s, this washing out of the night sky, and culminating today, both with that statistic that you mentioned, about 80% of the world living in a light polluted location, but now even the most distant corners of the planet are being impacted through low satellite arrays like the Starlink satellites that Elon Musk has been throwing up in the hundreds into the atmosphere, that streak across the night sky, even in the most remote corners of the planet. And so we've gone from something that was a unifying phenomenon for all of human history, basically up to the 1700s, to one where we have taken away that shared human experience, that shared reliable set of patterns that species could rely on, and washed it out, and often for no good reason, which is something that we can talk about as we go along.
Can you give some specific examples of some of the ecological changes that are happening because of the pollution?
Sure. So the thing that gets people's attention first are those examples that leave dead bodies on the ground. So, for example, the attraction of hatchling turtles to lights. The hatchlings are adapted to going away from the darkest horizon, and when you have coastal lighting, the darkest horizon becomes the ocean and not the land, and that leads them to places where they get killed. Insects being attracted to lights and killed at them. Of course, we've known it is deep within the idioms of our language, moth to a flame, that insects are attracted to light and then are killed at them. It has been known through that both fish and birds can be attracted to lights, and so you have things like light induced fisheries, where people hang a lantern and attract the lights and go fishing at night. Also, people do that with birds in certain places in the world, and then lighthouses attracting birds and killing them, etc. So we have these examples that are like attraction. There's also repulsion by light as well. So if you think about it, a fire to keep away the predators in the deep evolutionary history of humans is also an example of using light to manipulate animal behavior. So attraction and repulsion, that's one thing, and it can lead in many instances in the modern world either to habitat being degraded, it's too bright and a species doesn't want to use it, or in many instances killing the organism. So birds being attracted to cities and then colliding with glass, or being killed in other ways in the cities, sea turtles, insects, etc. as one category. Along with that is the idea of fragmentation. So we know behaviorally some species like to avoid lights. We have some evidence from Southern California and our mountain lions, which are not listed and endangered like yours, but suffer some of the same issues around our cities. That they like to avoid brighter lit areas. And so light can become a barrier, even if something doesn't look like it's fragmented. So thinking about the nighttime environment. So, and this goes for a whole suite of organisms that sort of arises from that attraction repulsion. A third set of things that happens that are more nuanced, and we've really started learning about them much more in the last 20 years, are ecological interactions between species. So pollination, for example, you can reduce the number of pollinators by lighting up a field. And that has a spillover effect even on the daytime pollinators, because the plants that get pollinated at night don't set as much seed, and then there's not as many flowers during the day. And this is, you think I'm just telling a story here, but people have actually done this experimentally, and shown these effects. So predator-prey relationships. Often lights are an advantage to predator species because they can see the prey, except in examples where you have prey species that work together to look for their predators. So a school of fish or a flock of birds that sort of have sort of we call communal vigilance. There's always somebody looking. They actually are benefited by lights. So it helps make some ecology things make sense. Urban crow roosts. So crows, which be a bit of a pain sometimes, but they tend to roost in places that are brighter than their surroundings because they have a communal vigilance, and there's always one crow who's awake looking for their predators. Schools of fish do the same thing, and so it disrupts these interactions between species. So all these interspecific interactions, and we're really learning a lot more about this. And then after that, we have all the sort of physiological responses to day length that we think about as being a circadian rhythm. So circadian rhythm, circa diem, around the day. And so because of the reliability of the patterns of light and dark over evolutionary history, both daily, annual, and lunar, there are cycles that go along with all of them. Annual cycles, lunar cycles, and daily cycles that can be physiological in terms of production of certain hormones, rest and recovery, stress hormones, and all of these things can be impacted by light at night. And so when an organism might migrate can be affected by light exposures. A study just showed this for I think it was martins going from South America up to North America. Can affect the time of laying, for example, in birds. Can affect levels of stress hormones. The melatonin, which is a hormone we and basically everything all other animals produce at night, only produced at night, is interrupted by exposure to light. And then perception of day length is related to that as well. So seasonal things that are cued by shortening days, for example, losing leaves on a tree, that's cued to day length. And so you'll often find a tree in a little bit more temperate climes, but a tree that's underneath the street light holds on to its leaves on one side of the tree and not on the other. And that's because the side that's by the light, hasn't detected that the days are getting short enough to lose the leaves. And so that, these things then have consequences.
It's interesting. I wouldn't think that artificial light would cause a tree to not lose its
Right.
leaves.
Yeah.
So you mentioned birds, and since we're on the Atlantic Flyway, I want to talk about birds and migration patterns and how how light can impact them. In my mind, I'm seeing like satellite images showing Florida all lit up. I'm also seeing radar images of birds migrating. So is it affecting birds on that scale, or is it more of a local, like when the birds come near a city, they fly into a window because it's lit up? How is it affecting the birds?
That's a really great question, because the answer to that question is yes. Um, Both of those things are happening. And we know this now because of the techniques that you just mentioned, which is radar ornithology, the use of weather radar to track birds, and then remote sensing to look at lights. And we can now say with complete confidence that birds are being affected in their migratory routes based on the lights coming up from the ground. And it can happen at a broad scale. There's a group out of Colorado State, Kyle Horton's group, that's actually developing some maps now to show this exact thing. And when you're at a local scale, lights are also affecting where the birds once you're down into the local scale. So you have the so for example, and I forget the exact distance. I think it was like within a kilometer and a half of the tribute in light at New York, the 9/11 memorial. With the lights off, there's like during migration, maybe there's 500 birds within a kilometer and a half, and you turn the lights on, and 20 minutes later, there's like 15,000 birds
Wow.
within a kilometer and a half. It's that level of, so for something like that, which is, and there's precedent for this, because really the tribute in light is, back in the 1940s would have been called a ceilometer. The lights that we had at airports to figure out how high the clouds were, which were basically that exact thing. They were very bright lights shining directly upward. And if you go back and you read the old newsletters and journals of local ornithological societies and Audubon chapters and whatnot from the 1940s, you have account after account of birds being killed at ceilometers during migration. So it's not like we didn't know this. We do this. But now we have the radar ornithology, and we can quantify it in a way that says, yes, birds are being concentrated in certain areas, cities, bright areas, because of lights, and then their behaviors in those areas are also locally affected by lights. Um, this
Well,
also
so
happens at communication towers.
okay, okay. So now I want to pivot to Hannah, because you rescue many injured birds. So I wonder what you are finding in terms of your the animals that you take in. What kind of impacts are you seeing that you can attribute to this light pollution?
Absolutely. So just around 10% of all of our intakes each year are due to window collisions, head trauma associated with window collisions or building collisions in general. And many of these are found in the early morning, which makes us believe that many of them do occur at night. Birds have evolved over time to migrate at night for a number of reasons. One, the cooler temperatures. So migrating is a very energy intensive task. So cooler temperatures at night, even in Florida, cool, really help to help them disperse that heat that they're using or that they're generating through this energy intensive migration. There's also less turbulent skies in the evening. So another way that they can conserve this energy, as well as less predators. So many other predators like hawks are diurnal, so aren't awake during the night. So we see all kinds of birds migrating through Miami, as you said, the Atlantic Flyway. So during these times, particularly April and May, and then in the fall migration, we'll just see massive, massive peaks, sometimes 5 or 6 in a single day of people finding warblers or other just general songbirds in front of their house or on the sidewalks in Brickell. And many people have never even come across one of these birds, and they're very surprised to learn, I guess, the huge impact that all of these glass wall buildings have on these birds, and what a large impact and deadly impact it can have.
So this may sound like a stupid question, it probably is, but so if the building is lit in the interior, is it that the bird is attracted to the light and just flies into the window, or what is the motivation for the bird?
Yeah, so it's as Travis said, it's a little bit of both. Some lights are actually attractants. It depends species. Birds can be attracted to the light, and then once they're in that urban environment, it's very difficult for them to maneuver their way out. Other birds feel uncomfortable leaving an area of light into darkness, so then they'll try to hunker down, and then same thing, they'll stay there overnight, but then the morning they're trying to navigate their way out of that city. And that spells trouble. But often it's just that the birds are generally disoriented by this large and unnatural source of light. And downtown Miami, especially, that's the trendy thing now, is just the entire building is just pure glass, which is, I guess, beautiful and aesthetic. But for these birds, it's particularly at night, if you're already disoriented and all you're seeing is a reflection of these unnatural lights, that's that's when the impacts really occur. Yeah.
And you mentioned a couple of species. One caught my attention, warblers, just because I was at the Tropical Audubon's bird banding station. I did a story
Mm-hmm.
about them
Mm-hmm.
earlier this year, and there's so many warblers, and I had no idea that these tiny little birds travel thousands and thousands of miles. And like you said, they fly at night, they cross the ocean at night.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that and like the species too
Mm-hmm.
that you're finding?
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, some of these birds come in and they weigh a whopping 6 grams. So a penny or two is the size of this bird, and their skulls are like tissue paper. It's, so you can imagine if you ran 15 miles an hour into a building, like that would hurt. But if you're a 6 gram bird with a tissue paper skull and you're hitting a building at 15 miles an hour, that's, it's gonna hurt. And unfortunately, sometimes it's a lot more than hurt. But I'll go ahead and share my screen. I have a few.
There's something so sad too about a bird that's crossed an ocean to arrive in Miami all lit up and then get disoriented by buildings.
I know. And a lot of them too are like being first year migrants. They haven't really gotten the lay of the land, and they're just going off of pure instinct and, navigating by the stars or, following the other birds. And then for them to have made it that far, like you said, yeah. So I guess there's a little overview. As you had said, we've treated over 40,000 patients in our history, 42-year history of over 200 different species, many of these being migratory. So this is just a handful of the different warblers that we see each year. Most of these are recent photos. We were very excited. We recently just got a Cape May warbler. That I know the banding station also said that they had seen a couple and they got very excited about that. But a large amount of our patients are migratory. And as I had mentioned earlier as well, 10% are due to window and wall collisions. So we get 2,000, upwards of 2,000 patients a year. So 10%, over 200 animals. And that's just the animals that people are finding and finding alive. So you can only imagine, like, that's just birds that people happen to come across. How many are just, out there that we have no idea the impacts.
Especially the smaller birds. I mean, I just can imagine that many people just don't even stop when they see a smaller bird.
Exactly.
Or the hawks, but not the warblers.
Yeah, in the early morning too, cats are out there often before people are. So if there's anything, a lot of times the cats will get to it first. So ovenbirds are one of our most common species. You can actually see here, this guy was a window collision. He's got a couple of missing feathers on his noggin there, but he was thankfully able to be released after a couple of days of anti-inflammatories. So here, this is a case study from 2021. We admitted 24 ovenbirds. And it's interesting as well to see kind of the difference here between fall and spring migrations, the number of birds that we're receiving. It's thought that spring migration, the birds are a little more focused and traveling faster because they're trying to get to those breeding territories first. They want to get the best resources before everyone else gets there. They want to have the opportunity to breed. So spring migration is really when we're seeing a lot more of an impact and a lot more patients coming in. And as I said, also cat attacks are a couple of the reasons here. Primarily it's window collisions and head trauma, but we can't help but wonder, is the reason that the cat attacked a bird because it was already debilitated, because it had struck a window, it was unable to fly, it was stunned. So we're not, we don't necessarily always attribute that to window collisions, but when it's during migration, we tend to kind of put the two together. So I don't want everyone to be depressed by this next slide, but of all of these 24 ovenbirds, only 3 of them were able to be released. And a large majority of these birds passed away within an hour or two of coming in due to just hemorrhaging. The brain swells to such a degree that the bird just cannot recover from that. That or they die within 24 hours. Sometimes the impact is delayed. So a bird might come in lively, amazing, looks fine, let's just release it. But we always keep it for 24 hours just to ensure that there is no, intense inflammation or any kind of neurological problems that we're not originally seeing. And another very common patient as well is 2021 case study here for common yellow throats. This is actually a photo that I took in Coconut Grove last year, just walking in Coconut Grove in the middle of the day. And I just happened to cross this bird, which was really striking because I see, every single day at Pelican Harbor, I see these birds come in, I hear these people's stories, but to come across one myself, was really kind of like, it took me aback and made me really realize, this is in your backyard. Even if you've never found one or seen, a window strike bird, they're everywhere, and nowhere is immune to this problem.
So I want to jump in real quick, just
yeah, of course.
because people, while they're thinking of it, are asking where they can bring birds that are injured. They can bring them to you here in Miami. What about Broward, Palm Beach County? Are there other organizations? Just to get that out there while the question is being asked.
Absolutely, yes. I will. I'll drop our website in the chat, as well as a couple different referrals for very, very south or northern, more in the Fort Lauderdale area. But we accept all native wildlife. So essentially, besides peacocks, pigeons, and Muscovy ducks, if it flies or walks, we'll take it in. So yes, please, we're always trying to spread the word. We've been here 42 years, and so many Miamians have never even heard of us. So you can see here, this is the same kind of story. Spring migration is a little more lively. And here we have almost all of these birds were coming in for head trauma or window strikes. And unfortunately, the same story, 4 of them were able to be released. So this is just 1 year, 2 species. So it really gives you an idea of, the micro scale of this absolutely like micro problem, 1 city.
Okay. And clearly, they're not recovering. The majority are not recovering. So now I want to pivot to Brian, because this can be a preventable problem, right? And you're trying to collect data. You have a program that you've launched and are asking for volunteers to help out. Can you explain to us what the program is?
Sure. My interest in this problem began when I began to hear about some of these mass casualty events that were occurring in major cities in the United States, where hundreds or thousands of birds would be killed. And it seemed that there was a correlation with light pollution. They were crashing into buildings, and light seemed to be involved. So Travis alluded to the World Trade Center memorial. So that's one of the more recent examples of a mass casualty event. Philadelphia had a recent mass casualty event in fall of 2021. So I began to ask myself, is this happening in Miami? We're a big city. We have lots of tall buildings that are, brightly lit. Why aren't we hearing about these mass casualty events? Or even why aren't we hearing about, just day-to-day bird collision events? This certainly isn't making the news. I think if it was a mass casualty event, it would make the news. But I haven't heard anything about it. So I was wondering why we're not hearing about it. I mean, Miami is on 2 different flyways, the Atlantic Flyway and the Mississippi Flyway. So twice a year during spring and fall, birds are flying over Miami. In the springtime, they're flying north. In the fall, they're flying south. And there has to be some kind of negative impact that all these bright lights from the buildings in Miami are having on these birds. So do you want me to share my screen so I can?
I believe you can share your screen, right, Emily?
Yes, indeed.
There we go.
All right, so just what I was talking about a moment ago. I mean, there are millions of songbirds that we know are flying over Miami twice a year, and they're using those two flyways to get in the spring from their wintering grounds in Central and South America and the Caribbean, all the way up to their breeding grounds in the rest of North America. In the fall, they're coming back south, back to their wintering grounds. So we're talking about all sorts of songbirds, thrushes, orioles, different warblers, up to 40 different species of warblers, tanagers, buntings, grosbeaks. All sorts of birds are using these flyways, and it's taking them over Miami. So as Hannah mentioned, songbirds typically migrate at night, and she alluded to some of the reasons for that, so I won't go over that again. And also, it's important to understand that because these songbirds are migrating at night, they're using nighttime navigational aids like the stars to find their way. There are other things that they use. There are magnetic fields. They use geographic markers like coastlines and rivers and things like that. But the birds that are flying at night, and the majority of songbirds are flying at night, they need to see the stars in order to navigate. And when they're passing over cities, they're unable to see the stars, so they have difficulty navigating. And then also, as was alluded to before, when they're flying over these brightly lit cities, they're disoriented by the lights of these buildings. And it oftentimes will force them to go off course, and it causes them to, it increases the likelihood that when daylight strikes and they try to find their way out of the city, they end up colliding with a building. So it's estimated that 1 billion birds every year are killed worldwide by collisions with buildings. But what I don't know, and apparently what no one knows, is how many of these birds are killed in Miami. So we won't know the answer to that question unless we develop a bird collision monitoring program and send volunteers out to try to find out how many birds are colliding with buildings.
Can I just ask one real quick question? I don't mean to interrupt you, but in the other places where you said they've been documented a higher number of bird collisions, is it just these mass events that happen, or are there better ways to collect data there, or are there more birds dying? Why is Miami seems to be like the exception?
I think the same thing. Well, I think that the same thing is happening in most cities, that on a day-to-day basis, there are X number of collisions, and then just a kind of a perfect storm situation where if you have certain weather conditions where birds have to come down closer to the surface because it's raining or that kind of thing, and they're flying through a city with lots of bright lights, that's probably the times when mass casualty events occur. So it's going to take people to go out there and comb the streets and look for these casualty events, whether they be just a single bird or large numbers of birds, before we understand how big the problem is here in Miami. So not only are we going to find out how many birds are colliding with buildings, we'll get some other information, like, for example, which are the birds that are most likely to collide with buildings, what time of year, time of day, when collisions are most likely to occur, and what are the kind of building lights or windows that are most likely to result in collisions. So we can learn all of those kinds of things by going out and looking to see where birds are colliding with buildings and what those buildings look like. So we're not, there have been many cities that have noticed the same problem, and they've created programs to try to answer the questions about the negative impacts of light pollution on migrating birds. So those programs have now become known as Lights Out programs. So there are now 43 different Lights Out programs in the United States. The first one was in Chicago. It was modeled after a program called the Fatal Light Awareness Program, which was started in Toronto, Canada back in 1993. So a lot of these lights out programs that have sprung up in different cities around the country are modeled after what has been done in Toronto and in Chicago.
Can you just explain a little bit about what that lights out program is? Is it basically people turning off their lights, or what?
Yeah, so this next slide will answer that question.
Yeah.
So
okay.
A lights out program can have three basic components. One of them is the component that I am organizing, which is a collision monitoring program. So Tropical Audubon Society is going to be doing that. We started in 2021. But we're also doing some other things to try to deal with the light pollution problem and its negative impact on birds. So we're encouraging homeowners and we're encouraging building managers to turn off unnecessary lights during spring and fall migration. And we're also advocating for changes in building construction or window construction so that it reduces the likelihood that birds will collide with the buildings or the windows. Now, in 2020, Audubon launched a partnership with the International Dark Sky Association, which is the organization that has created International Dark Sky Week that we're celebrating this week. So Audubon and IDA are kind of joining forces, what we know about birds, what IDA knows about light pollution, to try to help to solve this problem. So a little more about the implementation of our collision monitoring program. So it started in 2021, and we're going to be monitoring during spring and fall migration periods. So spring is March 15th to May 15th. Fall is August 15th to November 15th. Now, we're going to encourage anybody that wants to participate in this program to survey anywhere they want in Miami-Dade County. So if they go out for a walk first thing in the morning in their neighborhood, we're asking them to just watch to see if they find any bird collision victims. If they're walking their dog, if they're walking their in a stroller with their baby, these are all opportunities to do two things at one time. They can be watching for these bird collision victims while they're just taking their walk. But what we really, really need are for surveys to be done in areas that have tall buildings, and especially tall buildings that have large reflective windows. So the picture that I have on this screen is buildings on Brickell Avenue that you can see are tall and they have lots of reflective windows. So these may be the areas where mass casualty events are most likely to occur. So I have a picture on the screen of a black and white warbler carcass that was collected by one of the surveyors last year, but not all of the discoveries are dead birds. Just like Hannah has been getting a lot of injured birds coming into the seabird station, we're getting reports of injured birds that have been found that people suspect that they collided with a building, and they're reporting that to us. So we're encouraging that if anyone finds a dead or an injured bird, that they use their cell phone to take a photograph of it. And if it's an injured bird, then we're encouraging them to report it to a rehabilitation facility such as Pelican Harbor. So we're encouraging, because we know that songbirds migrate at night, it's most likely that they're going to be colliding with buildings first thing in the morning. So when someone,
So ideally you'd want the surveys done in the morning?
Yeah, first thing in the morning is probably the best time, not only because that's when it's most likely that, that birds are going to collide with buildings. you also want to get out there before the street sweepers and the leaf blowers, or even feral cats or other predators get to those bird carcasses. And then if they get them before we do, then we don't know they're there. So that's why doing it in the morning is important.
And so you'd ask people to take a picture with their phone. Can they send that to, do you have send it to an email you send it to, or is it, I'm thinking like the invasive species maps where you can go report on ifoundone.org or?
Well, what we're asking them to do is to report their sightings to a website called dbird.org. So if you're a birder, you've probably heard of eBird, which is a website where people can report sightings of live birds. dBird, as the name suggests, is where people can go and report sightings of dead birds. So I have a picture, a screenshot of what the dBird website looks like. So I have access to dBird so that I can see all of the submissions to dBird from Miami-Dade County. So what we're asking people to do is once they find a bird and they photograph it, then they go to dBird and they input information into dBird that will help us to understand where these collisions are taking place. So there's a map and they can put the address down where they found the bird, and that gives us the location of the bird. They can upload a photograph of the bird. They can tell us what species of bird it is. And even if it's someone that doesn't know one bird from another, as long as they take a photograph of the bird and input it to dBird, I can look at it. And if the photograph is clear enough, I'll be able to identify the bird myself, and I can edit their submission with that information. So we're also, dBird also asks for the sex and age of the bird, if that's known. There are just drop-down menus to answer those kinds of questions. The date and time the bird was found, the status of the bird, whether it was dead or injured, the cause of death, if it was known, any other notes about the bird, and then finally the name and email address of the observer so that I can contact them if I need additional information.
And then that data will help you figure out patterns, whether it's the kind of bird, the time of year, time of day, and how will that, I guess, inform some of the solutions?
Well, what we need is we need enough information to convince, especially building owners, and to convince county government to pass ordinances that what's called the lights out ordinance that would require tall buildings to turn off unnecessary lights during the peaks of spring and fall migration. So in most cities that have implemented a lights out program, they weren't able to advocate for a lights out ordinance until the county saw that we quantified the problem and showed that light pollution is definitely a problem in that particular city. So that's why it's important to collect as much data as we can to quantify how big of a problem it is in Miami. And then once we have that data, then we can present it to the county, and the county hopefully will pass a lights out ordinance. And then we can encourage building managers of tall buildings to turn off their lights during spring and fall migration.
And we have evidence that these programs work. I mean, I'm thinking of nesting sea turtles. I don't know if anybody here is a sea turtle expert, but nesting numbers, have increased because we've changed lighting patterns, right? Travis, maybe you can chime in here, but I believe that has been a pretty successful effort.
Yes, we can restore a beach through controlling the lighting, because it's not just the hatchlings. The females prefer to lay their eggs where it's not bright. So, and those as you know, Florida has statewide regulations around lighting surrounding beaches that work very hard to preserve those habitats and restore them, and it does work.
And so, Brian, how much data do you think you'll have to collect? What's to sort of convince the county that, or other counties, maybe not just Miami-Dade, but other places, that this ordinance could be effective?
It's really hard to say. I mean, it's all going to begin with getting enough volunteers to go out and collect data. And I know it can be frustrating. It's kind of an ironic, this project is kind of ironic in the fact that, you want to collect data, but you don't really want to find birds that have collided with buildings, because it's sad. So, when we started this program in the fall of last year, we had a number of people go out. A few people found individual bird collision victims. We didn't find any kind of mass casualty event. It was essentially, people were just finding one bird at a time. And I think it's a matter of just getting enough volunteers out there that are covering enough areas of the county that are probably problematic. Places like downtown Miami, Brickell, Coral Gables, Miami Beach, Aventura, all those places that have tall buildings that are brightly lit. We're going to need enough coverage of those areas to get enough data. And it's probably going to take 3 or 4 years before we have enough data to convince the county that an ordinance is necessary.
Can I just make a couple points here? One, of course, Diana has made some comments in the chat about sky glow not being mitigated by sea turtle ordinances. That's absolutely true. So there's many levels of work, and we can do much better and in fact, the same solutions for birds are going to be solving the sky glow issue for turtles, which is basically doing a better job of controlling lighting and reducing light spill intensity, not across the board, for coexistence with the incredible floral wildlife. The other thing is just how frustrating it is as a conservationist to time and time again have to prove something that's known to be true in a new jurisdiction because people don't believe what happened somewhere else is the truth. It's like there's this great, it was the mid-90s or something, there's a decision of a court case, I think it was National Environmental Policy Act court case in like Wisconsin or something, and the judge rules that no, you don't have any evidence that this is going to happen in Wisconsin because you did this study in Minnesota, and so there's no Wisconsin studies showing that this is what's going on. How completely moronic is it that we have a society in which people believe that scientific knowledge ends somehow at city or state lines, and leaves elected officials and judges so ignorant that they can't actually extrapolate science from one place to another. It's really quite remarkable that it takes proving that it's a problem. We know that this is an issue in Florida. We can go back and look at the communication tower data, and we know that birds have been, and the migratory routes, the radar ornithology, we know all of this. And the fact that we have to prove it is just a reminder of how stacked the deck is in society against conservation. It is simply an excuse to ignore knowledge that we already have, to have to be forced to it. And the other point here is that humans have this tendency to only react to and act against the sort of catastrophic, the big event, the mass casualty and whatnot. That's also stupid, because the majority of migratory bird deaths are not coming from mass casualty events. We call them trickle kill. It's, this little bit by little bit, the constant that's spread over, the thousands and millions of structures in for example, North America, the low rises, the things that don't create the mass casualty events, but numerically are far more abundant than the places that do. And consequently contribute more to the problem. And again, it's a problem with scientific innumeracy, that we have to show somebody and hit them over the head with, look, this really bad thing happened. And this is one of the reasons I haven't yet really pursued a lights out strategy in Los Angeles, because we don't really have a history of mass casualty events. We know it happens. I've collected dead birds outside of windows during migration. We know that birds are coming through. We've got them on but because politicians and decision makers are motivated by the sexy soundbite, it's almost impossible to convince them. So anyway, I hate to rant here, but it's a real
No, a rant is
illustration.
good. A rant is good.
Because we should be able to pool our knowledge and understand. Also, let's expand this out and talk about safety and what are lights for, and the lighting, the lighting research. Oftentimes we have lights that people think are giving them some additional safety when they are not, because it's bad lighting. And so this is why my theme is always better lighting for nature, which doesn't necessarily means brighter. It means light that does what it needs to do. And that means providing, visual cues to people who are using the landscape after dark to ensure their safety.
Give us an example of like what would be. I mean, as you guys are talking, I'm thinking like convincing people to turn the lights off in a city might be a hard thing to do, but you're talking about better lighting, like specifically, what would you do at a park at night? If a park is closed at night, does it need to be lit? Some people would say yes, because it's a safety issue. Some people say, well, that's a waste of lighting because nobody's using it.
Yep. So we're working on these very issues right now. The Illuminating Engineering Society, which sets the standards that aren't legally binding, but because we live in a culture that's dominated by lawsuits and fear of liability, people follow them. So it's a professional, it's like a professional society, although it is now partnered with International Dark Sky Association and the National Park Service, and I'm on a couple of these committees, and we're actually now grappling with that very question, like what does it mean to do lighting in a park? What actually has to be lit and what doesn't? Because these standards, even though they're not legally binding, are so important for things like landscape architects who have to actually stamp a plan. Because when you stamp a plan, and then something happens, an outdoor lighting plan, and then something happens, you and your insurance might be liable if you were found to be negligent for not providing the right amount of light. So I get it, you're in a bind. So getting in the room with people who are working on the wildlife issues and who also have the incredible personal responsibility of knowing they're on the hook if something goes wrong, if their lighting plan isn't adequate and is found deficient. That's the important conversation that needs to happen. And this really came out around the question of pools, because I was in this meeting with you can't light that pool there. That's a sea turtle beach. You just can't light it there. No, I have to light it. I can't stamp the plan unless it's lit. And I've actually known landscape architects who've refused to take on certain parts of it job that would, because of their ethics, because they didn't want to light a sea turtle beach, but they knew if they took on the job around the pool, the standards say it has to be lit, and therefore it was going to be lit. And so they had a choice between doing something they knew was wrong one way and doing something they knew would give them liability the other way. And that's why these conversations are so important. That's the work that it's really interesting. It goes on inside of national and international bodies that are standard setting bodies. And so I'm on a committee right now for the International Commission Internationale d'Éclairage, which is the international lighting standards, the CIE. And it is a painstaking, slow, painful process because, first of all, many of the standard setting organizations are only now inviting lighting experts in, lighting impact experts in. They've had the lighting engineers forever, right? But to have somebody in there who's like a wildlife person who's like, no, too bright, that's a new thing. But we're doing it, and it's it's really slow because most of these things also operate on consensus. So, for example, and this is not science. Doesn't have to be scientific consensus. It has to be consensus of the people who are on the committee. So the Illuminating Engineering Society here in North America has these recommended practices that are based on consensus of lighting engineers from around the country who get together and decide that those are the right light levels. it doesn't actually have to be based on any science. It just has to be based on consent, and there's veto power. So I was on a committee, one of these committees, and I'm like, no, I can't sign off on that. I didn't realize this at the time, you know, that what was going to happen. I'm like, I can't sign off on that because you haven't dealt with spectrum properly. Because one of our challenges with lights is that the full spectrum light across almost all biological impacts, with the exception of bioluminescent organisms like fireflies, full spectrum light with a lot of blue is worse. It scatters more, there's more visual sensitivity to it, it interrupts circadian rhythms, etc. And so I was on this committee and I was like the token wildlife person, and I said, I can't sign off on this recommended practice because it doesn't deal with spectrum properly. And the response was, I thought they were just going to say, okay, fine, we're doing it anyway, because I'm used to being ignored, which is what happens when you get into these places where money is involved, and you're arguing for wildlife that doesn't pay any design fees. But what they did is they stopped, and they said, oh no, we have to have consensus. I'm like, well, wait a minute, I got a veto on this, which was great in the instance, but it also means that every lighting engineer who thinks that the safest intersection is the brightest one, if they end up on one of these national committees, they don't have to actually marshal any science to show that it is safer. They can just say no. And that's why it's slow progress.
And I wonder, though, to bring it back to Brian's and Audubon's Tropical Audubon's project, I mean, even though they may not base their decisions on science, I can't help but think like these brick by brick by brick, you know, you anecdotally lay out this problem, even though as you said, it's been laid out in other places, the more of that that's been done, the more the public engages, the more attention is brought. I mean, is that helpful?
Yeah, I think the more attention that's on it, certainly. And I know, you know, Alejandro, who is also a lighting expert, who's in the chat here, is talking about the standards for this thing. But I'm telling you, in the scientific basis, fundamental need for standards to be reviewed is they do not appear to be founded in robust empirical evidence. That is a problem that we have out there right now. We need to connect the evidence back to the standards. And so I think the more that the general public and the advocacy public, which is where I put everybody who's on this call interested in this topic, is engaged and recognizes this as a real issue that deserves attention in the conservation community, and the pressure that gets put on, the more effort there's going to be on the part of the standard setting bodies to have to defend their standards based on evidence and not based on, this guy from Minnesota just thinks that the lights need to be brighter and he's not going to sign off on the standards. Who knows how he got on the committee? That's a whole nother question in these bodies as well. And then the whole thing really is a bit of a racket, because you can't get access to the standards yourself unless you pay for them, and they're several $100s. So like, I as a scientist can't go to the CIE unless I'm on a committee. I can't go to the CIE or the IES and say, can I look at your standards for roadway lighting? They're like, no, you have to pay $400 for them.
So I feel a little overwhelmed by all this, because
sorry, but
what can we do? I mean, we can help collect data, but then if it's some committee I've never heard of that costs $400 to join, and then even I'm just one veto, but I'm not going to be invited to the committee,
Right.
What do we do?
Well, making this a topic that everybody knows about and cares about and asks about, and talking to your electeds everywhere and say, we want the best thing for whatever it is your issue is, because you can get a jurisdiction to go against and build flexibility into not following the standards slavishly. So Salt Lake City just did this because they just put out a disclosure. I was on part of the consultant team that worked for them, because they went out and said, we want to do the best dark sky wildlife friendly lighting that we can, because that's part of our brand, is the dark skies in Utah. And we tried this transition and we got all this bright LED stuff that nobody liked. We want to do it better. How do we do it better? And they wrote an RFP because of pressure from people in Salt Lake City. And so the city council went into it, and the municipal folks went into it saying, let's do this right. Let's do it right, and have as a value in our plans wildlife, human health, night skies, tourism, right? Because big tourism dollars come from dark night skies in Utah, and can many other places as well. And that led to a set of standards that the city adopted that said, we explicitly say we're willing to go below the IES standards in order to balance these needs. And we've thought about it, and we're willing to do it. And that's how you get out of it, because otherwise the quote-unquote standards become the default that everybody follows unless you're proactive. But that only came about because people went to their government and said, we want a plan that's better than what you're doing, and here are our values. We value the night sky, we value the tourist dollars that come with it, we value wildlife, we value human health. Now you go figure out how to do it. And that led to a plan that actually gets around it.
And I just want to recommend to folks that if you want to take local action on this issue, your point person is here on the call with us. I'm going to share Diana Upierre's contact information in the chat box. This is an issue that Sierra Club cares about. What Travis just described, talking to our elected officials about our values and why this matters and how to make a difference, is exactly what we're working on every day.
And I see a couple people are asking how to access the dBird app. Is that, can I go, Ryan, into my iPhone and download it from the apps, or
it's actually, it's not an app, it's a website. So it's simply dbird.org. And if you go to Tropical Audubon's website, which is tropicalaudubon.org, and you go to the Lights Out Miami page, which is in our conservation drop-down menu, there is a direct link to dBird. And what we also have on the Lights Out Miami page is a button that you can click to register to volunteer to do surveys, so that we can keep track of who's doing surveys. I can get their email addresses, provide for them the information they need to do it according to the protocols that we've set up for doing this.
And on these surveys, are you looking for people to go out together? I'm kind of thinking of like when we do the Christmas bird count, and it's very festive. Although, like you said, this is not going to be festive, but how are you envisioning these surveys happening, just when people have the time? Or
yeah, I mean, the way that we're starting it off now is I'm trying to be very flexible. So if someone wants to just go out on their own and do it, if people want to get together as a group and do it, the bottom line for us is simply collecting the data. So once we start collecting, much more data than we've collected so far, we can start targeting specific areas in the county that we think really need to be surveyed better. That's why I'm really hoping to that for this presentation and other presentations that I've done about this issue, that that some of the people that are listening to us are people that actually live in areas that we're concerned about, living in downtown Miami, the Brickell area, Miami Beach, so that they don't have to, travel X amount of miles just to get to where we want them to do a survey, that they can just walk out of the door of their building and do a survey right around their own neighborhood. So we want to try to make it as easy for them as possible.
And what kind of response are you getting so far?
The response has not been overwhelming, to say the least. In the fall, I had maybe about a dozen people that contacted me, and a few went out and collected data. We did get some data last fall. I've been very disappointed in the spring season that we started, we started putting out notifications that we were starting the spring season right at the beginning of March. And we've only had about a half dozen people respond, and not a single submission to dBird so far this spring. So we've been kind of going backwards. So I'm going to be contacting those people that did register to do surveys after May 15th, which is the end of our spring season, and ask them, how many surveys they did. And then I'll get a better idea of, is it a situation where they've been going out and they simply haven't been finding birds, or is it because they haven't been going out at all? So that's what I'll need to know.
Okay. And Hannah, I want to pivot back to you because we're not hearing from you on what would you like to, as somebody who has to treat all these injured animals, what would you like to see done?
I think it's a great start here with the 42 of you that have tuned in and are still here with us. I think just education, educating yourselves, educating your neighbors, your local elected officials. The Nextdoor app, we get all the time people saying like, oh, like I heard about you through Nextdoor. I posted, I found a bird. So I think just caring beyond the point of just seeing like a sad article on Facebook and maybe like reposting it, like to actually get out there, get on the ground and do these surveys, volunteer for these surveys, sign a petition, email your local elected officials, speak to your local civic groups. If you're in a large apartment building, perhaps talking to your, what's the word for that?
Your condo manager person?
Yeah, the associate, there we go. The building association, anything, everything. People sometimes tend to be discouraged, I think, with these big, huge problems like, oh, just little old me, like, what am I supposed to do? But if you take one small action that saves the life of one bird, that's a life you just saved, and not many people can say that. So
do you find that when people bring the injured birds to you all, are they looking for what more they can do?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I did drop in the chat as well a great webinar we recently hosted about ways to mitigate window collisions, particularly in Miami. And there's some things like, oh, well, like you need to change this ordinance or that, like that can seem super overwhelming. But it can come down to just, put a little sticky note on your fridge. Remind yourself, oh, it's migration. Like, let me just dim the lights tonight. Or, oh, you know what? The building I work at has a lot of windows. Like, let me talk to my boss. Maybe we can put some dots on the windows to help. So I do think that a lot of people, once they do learn about this problem, or especially if they have that kind of personal interaction with finding a window collision or hearing about it, that really makes them want to act and get more involved. And hopefully that will just continue to spread, and it won't take, mass collisions or this terrible, horrible news story. It'll just take a couple of people spreading the word to really gain momentum and hopefully make a change.
And so, Travis, these little things that we can do individually, it sounds like though there has to be a bigger kind of overarching change that you were talking about. I guess not globally, but like locally in Miami-Dade County, what kind of ordinance could be crafted here to make a difference? I feel like it's a little bit of like the climate change issue. Like it's a global problem, but we all have to act individually too.
Yeah. And I think you're right to focus on the ordinance because, as with most of these issues, individual action is, I think, important psychologically, but doesn't make the difference. None of us is going to recycle our way into, climate getting better. And so the most, and I'm this is a little bit of a pet issue, is that we have a tendency to push everything back on the individual as if the individual is going to save it. We have this very individualist culture in the United States. But the most important thing you can do as an individual is vote for people who care about these things, because the solutions at scale require the conviction and courage of the electeds to do something. So, for example, let's take New York has bird-friendly building guidelines. San Francisco has bird-friendly building guidelines. The federal government has an executive order requiring all new federal buildings comply with bird-friendly guidelines. We have plenty of precedent now, and bird-friendly guidelines include things to reduce light pollution and collisions that are associated with glass. So one thing that could be done almost out of the box is to adopt bird-friendly building guidelines and just see what's San Francisco done. Can we be as good as San Francisco or better? What's New York done? And go from there. Or in the incentive side, to point out that there is a light pollution reduction credit that can be had for LEED buildings, which is often people who want to do something good and communicate they're doing something good will get certification for their building. And LEED Pilot Credit 55 is light pollution mitigation, and so and there's a bird friendly component to this as well. So getting whatever level of government it is to adopt these as not just good ideas but requirements is the slow way to retrofitting. There's also a sort of encouragement of things that are much harder to legislate. So for example, the Lights Out program FLAP did in Toronto starting 25-30 years ago, whatever it was. They did a lot of outreach to building owners to deal with things where there's like just ways that you manage your building at night that can be changed that don't necessarily cost a lot of money, but can be done. So like instead of sending a separate custodian to each floor, sending the custodian team to one floor at a time all together and like just do the whole floor and then having the lights out on all the other floors while you're doing the one floor, right? So that's like a simple, in quotes, simple change. Now maybe it upsets the way one manages the custodial staff, but it is a way to get fewer windows lit at a time on a building while still achieving what you need to achieve. And those kinds of things are in fact harder to legislate, but there are incentives. Then this is, I think, where the sort of conservation sector comes in, is recognizing good actors for doing good. And so FLAP would give awards to buildings that had done things like this, even while pursuing legislation that would make everybody need to perform better.
And before we run out of time, Alejandro Sanchez de Miguel, I'm sorry, is on the call. I don't know, can he be unmuted to talk a little bit about the issue? I think you're unmuted now.
Yeah, hi from Spain. Nice to hear you, and I'm very happy hearing you because I'm learning a lot. And I became a super fan of dBird from now on. I'm spreading the word in Spain, so don't get surprised if you get some dead birds from here. Something that I wanted to comment. Something that anyone.
You're being shy. Just I would say put a plug in for your Cities at Night work.
Ah, okay. Yes. Yes, something that anyone can do on top of the other thing that I was going to say is that, for example, we have amazing images taken from the space by astronauts that actually probably the best tool to trace light pollution worldwide. They have been acquired for free for us because the astronaut does it like a hobby, more or less. But and they are like the Hubble Space Telescope images of the Earth at night, but we don't use them that much for science because they are quite difficult to locate in the NASA archive. So we created a citizen science project called Cities at Night and an app called Lost at Night. I'm going to put the web now in the chat, lostatnight.org, and with that you can help to locate these images. And for example, Diana have posted before some images of Florida from the ISS, and some of them were located by our volunteers. So it's really, really helpful, and it's something that anyone can do. And on this app that I have just posted, and it's really helpful, no, to trace how the world is changing, and in the future we hope, no, that we will use all this. But another thing that anyone can do also is these pictures were taken with regular, well, quite regular DSLRs, a bit pro, but they're not much more different from the cameras that you have in your mobile phone, or if you like to take pictures, and they are extremely valuable. Your pictures that you can take are extremely valuable for science. There's only one tiny thing that you can do to improve the quality, is take raw images. Yeah, if you take raw images of that particular location, that can be maybe the only image of that light pollution facility. And if they change to LEDs or they change to any other kind of lighting, your picture can be extremely valuable to trace how, if the light pollution is increasing or decreasing, and they are incredibly accurate, much more accurate than you might think. Astronomers, we use pictures taken with DSLRs to detect exoplanets. Yeah, so don't think that your DSLR pictures or raw images taken from your phone are not reliable. They are very reliable. They might be a bit tricky to calibrate, yeah, but that's our job. Okay, that's our job, and we are working on that. And we would like the kind of cameras that you have will be the standard, no? Because it will be the standard of the people, no? And will be a standard to measure light pollution worldwide, super fast to implement. And it will happen if the people take these images, no? To record how light pollution is happening, no? Because to reduce the CO2, we have to go to the places that the CO2 is generated. No? In this case, to reduce light pollution, we have to take pictures not only of the sky glow, but also of the sources of the light pollution. And this is my advertising. And thank you very much for having me here.
Okay, well, I think we're coming in. We've got 5 minutes left. So I guess I'd like to kind of go around the panel and ask everybody. I mean, we've sort of been asking like what to do, but I'm going to ask again, the one thing that people like locally, the people who are on the Zoom session can do that you individually think would be the most important thing for them to do. I guess I should say who should go first. Brian, do you want to go first?
Sure. For us, I would recommend that everyone listening go to Tropical Audubon's website and the Lights Out Miami page, where we have all the information about not only the bird collision monitoring program, but also we encourage people to take a homeowner's pledge. So there's a button you can click on and it'll give you a list of all the things that homeowners can do to help to mitigate bird collisions in their own home. So we've had dozens and dozens of people who have already taken the homeowner's pledge. We also have a similar pledge for building managers that hasn't been as popular, but that's because we really haven't gotten the word out yet of what we're trying to do on a really large scale. It's been mostly just our members that are clicking on that homeowner's pledge particular button. And we also have links to National Audubon Society and the American Bird Conservancy that are both focusing on the light pollution issue as it affects birds, with just lots and lots of information so people can get educated about what the extent of the problem is and things that they can do to help to mitigate the problem.
Excellent. Emily? I'm sorry, Emily, not you yet. Your last. Hannah?
Hi. Yeah, I would definitely agree with everything you just said, Brian, as well as going to your local commission or council meeting as well and speaking up there. Educating yourself and your community is important, but educating those higher ups as well, people that don't really encounter this at all in their, day-to-day government goings on. Just trying to get your elected officials on board and excited about this as well, to continue, there's the individual level, and then there's this and so it can seem overwhelming. I feel like we're all like coming from it from different angles. I'm saying, do it individual, and then Travis is like, we have to go to the top, but it's all of the above. It's anything and everything that you can do, whether it's just you or your family or your home or your city. I'm just scroll through the chat here. There's dozens and dozens of different options and resources. So yeah.
Excellent. I know there are so many links in the chat that I hope someone's like keeping note of them and going to post them somewhere.
Exactly.
And Travis?
Yeah, well, I don't want to leave people with the impression that just because I think it's frustrating we have to do something that we shouldn't actually do it. So it's just a frustration. But go volunteer and find your dead birds and get your local story and attention to this topic, because politics are local, and that's probably why we have to do this over and over again. But please, get engaged there. The only thing I might add is if this is a topic that really speaks to you, you can stay in the loop on it by becoming a member of the International Dark Sky Association, and get their newsletter, just as a means to have another sort of connection to other people who are caring about this issue around the world. So I want to hear more volunteers for Brian.
And Emily, I'm going to hand it off to you then, because I think my work is done here.
Thank you so much, Jenny and Travis and Hannah and Brian. This has been educational and enlightening and inspiring. Folks, you heard it here first, right? We want to continue to support Pelican Harbor, Tropical Audubon Society, and the International Dark Sky Association. If you care deeply about this issue and you want to communicate with other folks who care about it, please consider reaching out to Sierra Club. As mentioned, lots of links in the chat. Don't worry if you didn't capture the chat box. You will get a follow-up email after this webinar with all of those great links. There is an active petition right now asking local mayors to take actions to protect dark skies. Join us in our work to do that. Thank you also to our organizer, Diana Upiere, and our host, Sierra Club Miami Group. It has been a pleasure, folks. I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your evening.